What's it got to do with you? Shit!
In the 40-minute runtime of 1989's Elephant, 18 people lose their lives. No names, no plot, just mindless acts of violence. No room to breathe, to think, to enjoy the ride. Barely 2 minutes pass before another man is shot in a back alley or a doorway. Millions of people across Britain sat down in front of their TV to watch this new BBC broadcast, listed as a gripping depiction of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And what was presented before them was a barbaric and harrowingly real look into what was going on in many people's back gardens. Many online like to label the murders in Elephant as random. I believe this is a diminishing and incorrect statement. While the brutal violence displayed in Elephant may be out of context, almost inconceivable at that, it is not random. Elephant showcases a series of murders that can be reasonably understood to be connected to sectarian violence. Presumably, most if not all killings presented are sectarian murder, being carried out without flags, without names, and without sides. Presumably, these are all naturally heavily political. Presumably, that is. And yet, presumably is the word that Alan Clark and Danny Boyle are absolutely trying to avoid in their delivery of Elephant. The senseless violence delivered across the 40 minutes of killings is meant to be seen as senseless, not argued and not subjectified. There are no sides to Elephant, and Alan Clark was deliberate in his decisions to ensure this was a prominent understanding. For many, this is why Elephant could not be understood. Often people at the time didn't want their thoughts to be provoked, the belief deeply rooted in the title and opening message of Elephant. The short film was titled Elephant because, to many, the Troubles were the elephant in their living room. I'm trying to stay as far away from the politics of this issue as possible because I'm aware I'm about to drastically pivot to talking about video games. But the Troubles were something that everyone knew was going on. They had become so desensitized to it that it was like it wasn't even happening anymore. That this was an utter normality to be ignored within the time period. When watching Elephant, this is a notion I began to grow all too familiar with. I've been thinking about a very similar normality that goes just as ignored as the topic of Elephant. The violence we all ignore.
It was just men running around with guns.
This is not a video about games invoking violence, nor is it surely a critique of violent video games. In fact, I like violent video games. I want to argue that without violence, some games would be severely lacking. But that's why I've been so drawn to making this video. This video is the establishment of an issue that has been ingrained into the gaming zeitgeist since the inception of games themselves. Violence has become the elephant in the room of gaming. While newsrooms, parents and older generations go back and forth over whether or not real-life violence does indeed correlate to video game violence, the rest of us gamers, just play it. Never acknowledging or addressing it, never putting the controller down when the game gets a bit too gory. We don't need to be convinced to kill. We do not need to know that it's okay, to know that it doesn't matter, that it's just a game. But why? How do games let us be so accepting of this crushingly heavy topic? It's interesting to think how we never consider what the least painful way to kill someone in a video game might be. We consider in length the most efficient ways, the way that will draw the least amount of attention from other enemies. In titles like Assassin's Creed and The Last of Us, there is the option to stealth kill. Strangling an enemy unconscious or covering someone's mouth and slowly bringing them to the floor with a knife deep in their chest. But even these efficient eliminations don't appear to be particularly pain-free as it goes. In real life, the only times we think of killing and death in terms of efficiency and effectiveness is in war and combat. And it's certainly not true that the only times we kill in video games are during war. To this you may suggest that, well, you shouldn't need to. It is only a game, and there's no point worrying about how much pain a collection of pixels on your screen might hypothetically feel. But may I add, those pixels are capable of making you cry, are they not? Or angry, or scared, or happy, excited. Video games are clearly capable of making us feel empathy, feeling that these characters are real people. So why don't we feel that their pain matters? Furthermore, we clearly do feel that their pain matters. If I dragged a person from the rope of my horse and threw them into the mouth of a live crocodile in Red Dead Redemption 2, you would say, oh, what a terrible way to go. In Outlast, when your fingers are chopped off by the mad Dr. Traeger, do you not wince in pain as these pixels do? I'm not saying we need to start considering how much pain these characters are feeling, but if, in a Call of Duty title, you were given a chemical weapon to use that would not only hospitalize the enemy, but would ensure that their children's children would have birth defects and debilitating disabilities for the rest of their lives, would you be as inclined to use them as a rifle or a grenade? Where is the limit? I feel that I've not totally convinced you that this is a necessary video to make, so let me give you an example. We can agree that a lot of developers are striving to make the most realistic video game possible, right? Graphics, landscapes, choreography, these are all things that need to be considered when developing a AAA title. From a literal perspective, Red Dead Redemption 2 took notable steps backwards in how smooth it is to control Arthur Morgan. The analog stick doesn't simply move the character on screen. It feels more like you're compelling Arthur to walk forward. Rather than just pressing a button to watch a character move on screen, there is now a deliberate clunky feel. So, when do you think we'll decide when the violence in our video games is too violent, too realistic? Do you want to feel like you're killing a real person? Do you want buck fever from shooting down an animal in Red Dead Redemption? What then will you say to the reporters and critics when they ask you to explain why video games don't invoke real-world violence? Let's talk about it. Address the elephant in the room. This is not a criticism of video game violence, but a discussion of why we accept that violence. I'd like to talk about ways in which video games justify intense and complex topics, and whether or not some games even want us to address this elephant of brutality. Men and women running around with guns. But quickly, I just want to tell you to subscribe. That's all. Thanks so much for the support on my last video, and if you enjoy my work, I implore you to drop a sub so I can keep growing. The easiest and most obvious solution to this dilemma is to make the violence optional. Undertale notoriously featured both a pacifist and genocide route that delivered wildly different narratives. This way, the violence depicted is unignorable because it's the player's choice to commit it. I mentioned the idea that we often don't need to consent to commit acts of violence in games. So when you do need to consent, to admit, yes, I want to kill this enemy out of my own volition, it makes the choice feel far more deliberate and justified. How you justify it isn't important because it's not the game's fault whether or not you do it. Not every game can involve a pacifist route, however. Game developers don't want to restrict themselves to thinking about the guy making video essays. So another easy fix to this problem is to make the targets of this violence alien. This could mean aliens in the literal sense, the big grey head, or it could mean just appearing non-human, detached from what we might look at as brutal and shocking. This is how many games get around this dilemma and seems like one of the most unproblematic solutions. It also often bumps the age rating of a game down a whole category. The story of an army waging a war against another army of people? Well, of course, that game must be for 18+. A game about an army waging a war against another army of aliens? 16-year-olds can enjoy that as much as they want. All we need to know is that this unknown life force is in some way evil, and that is all the motivation we need to prevail above them. I want to focus on that word, motivation, as it's the first thing I think of when I wonder how a game can make violence so acceptable. We often need reason and motivation to kill. It turns violence from unrecognizable to justifiable. A lack of motivation leads to a strong dissonance between the player and the character's actions. We start to not be able to see ourselves in their shoes. In the modern God of War series, Kratos has so much banking on everything he does. He has a son to protect now, a way of life and a peace that is being threatened by trespassers into his life. For that reason, we, as audience members who are not gods, are able to grasp Kratos' motivation, and it becomes ours as well. For a game with such a focus on combat, there is never a feeling that this violence is unnecessary. It's just a way of life for Kratos, almost natural selection. The elephant gets smaller and smaller. Motivation is critical, so when it's missing, we feel disconnected. Although sometimes, this is exactly what developers want. Last of Us Part 2 is violent, and it's a very weighted game. Each kill and interaction feels like life or death. There is never an enemy that feels out of place. The thing about The Last of Us 2 that becomes really interesting is how this feeling has evolved from the first game. In The Last of Us Part 1, there was a heavy focus on the infection. You witness Outbreak Day, encounter firsthand the infected that are able to strip you from your life at any moment. In The Last of Us Part 2, this focus dramatically shifts because you play as Ellie. Ellie's completely immune to the infection. She can still have her throat ripped open by a clicker if she's not careful, but there are times in the second game where it's completely understandable to forget the series is even about zombies. Joel was no saint, but his moral code always felt provoked. That motivation that we spoke about earlier was so prevalent in his journey with Ellie. When you come around to playing as this girl that Joel's whole character arc was about protecting, and she's exploding heads and blowing up bodies more frequently than Joel ever did, this ludonarrative dissonance starts to grow more and more. I didn't sign up for this. I wanted more of my favourite duo. I wanted the moral grey area the first game had, the necessary evil, not the full metal jacket massacre that we've got now. What you're looking for is consequence. And you soon find out that, in fact, this game has plenty of consequence. Often when you take out a member of one of the many groups you encounter, you'll hear someone nearby scream out their name in terror. For all you know, that could be their best friend you just shot, a partner, a family member. It makes Ellie's barbaric nature feel unignorable. The elephant in the room is growing bigger. I don't want to keep doing this. I want Ellie to stop. She needs to know that there are consequences to her action. The world around you comes crashing down. It does matter. Everything up until this point has mattered. Ellie was blinded by rage and revenge to the point that she becomes distant from everyone, even you, the player. You then see the other perspective, the so-called enemy you've been rampaging through. You see children in classrooms, full canteens and rescue missions. You see tents lined up with body bags full of parents, medics, soldiers, everyone else who has died in this post-outbreak day dystopia. I think The Last of Us is trying to address the elephant. You are gripped by the wrist and dragged along to be shown that your actions do matter. It's a rather involuntary feeling, dragging you under the interrogation light. And it's inadvertently symbolic for gaming as a whole. For far too long, this kind of stuff hasn't mattered, the cycle of violence if you will. When a franchise so popular showcases that violence does matter and should be talked about, it naturally causes a stir. The Last of Us Part 2 isn't perfect. It notably gives you no real alternative to the violence and kind of forces you to grow dissonant with the characters and events of the game. But I'd still like to take away its most important point. Violence has consequences, and it cannot go unaddressed. The reason so many games about combat and conflict fail is because they can't get this right. There needs to be a set of moral scales, a point to the violence, and a declaration that, yes, there will be casualties and it will matter. Call of Duty needs to show you that you're not allowed to shoot at women and children in order for you to understand that war has casualties. I do think a lot of the Call of Duty games are fun to play, especially the Modern Warfare trilogies, but they have never been particularly strong in their depictions of violence. Actually, that's not true. They depict it really well. They've got torture scenes down to a T, the gunplay is magnificent across most of the series, and they've always excelled in their multiplayer department. But as far as their justification for this depiction goes, I think there are very few that do it as poorly as Call of Duty. There is this constant feeling that every action taken by the good guys is the right thing to do, No matter the consequences, the motivation, or the context behind these decisions, the Americans and the Brits are always utterly correct. And you know what? Maybe this isn't Call of Duty's fault. I can't think of many war shooters that are able to depict violence particularly pleasingly. Maybe it's just something we, as an audience, need to accept. But what if I don't want to accept it? There is always a Franz Ferdinand level of justification for the events of each Call of Duty storyline. One of these games justifies its depictions of violence through several strong narrative and character-driven motivations, and one of them chalks it up to a casualty of war. And it doesn't even show the negatives of war effectively at that. There is no moral framework. In God of War, you can understand that people want to kill Kratos because he's a god who has come to this world and in some ways has wreaked havoc. He has an omnipotent bounty hanging over his head, and when he makes the wrong move, kills the wrong god, this sense of consequence is only heightened. In The Last of Us Part 2, it really is kill or be killed in America. If you make it past the clickers and spores, you still might not make it past the looters and other groups. There are stakes and motivations, and when those motivations start to slip away from the player, it's addressed as it should be with real consequence. In Call of Duty, there is only brash ignorance. The ignorance of Western power and their task of stopping all-out war against the rest of the world. When you actually piece together the stories of most Call of Duty games, they unfold themselves to uncover a wildly convoluted narrative that oftentimes completely runs away from the actual gameplay. And while this doesn't feel purposeful, it's like the game is trying to fill the story up with so much motivation that you just play the game without a care of anything going on. But that doesn't really work when Call of Duty simultaneously grounds itself in realism and current affairs, to the point of trying to pose some kind of wild commentary, or place in the conversation. The Modern Warfare series may be in fact a fantastic Western depiction of many aspects of the War on Terror, because of its utter ignorance towards it. The war crimes committed both voluntarily and involuntarily are deemed as necessary evil, intrinsic to the whole idea of the invasion of the Middle East. Maybe this is just what war is, but this is also what war is, just stated far more subtly. It feels like parody. If you fail to adhere to the game's scripting and shoot the woman and child, the game tells you that children are not combatants. Well, obviously. Was that really necessary? But actually, maybe it is necessary according to the game, because I lied. Because if you really try, or you've just got a bit of a trigger finger, you can shoot the mother before she's able to run and grab the baby, to which you'll be told to pull yourself out and carry on with the mission with little interruption. In fact, I lied again. The mother can be shot cradling the child in her arms. An SAS agent will slowly march in to put the baby back in its cot, and you're again told to pull yourself out, with no consequence or alteration to the mission's conclusion. Well, Captain Price, will you sort me out? Because no matter how many civilians I drop throughout this mission, I will not be scolded further than this.
We made the right call, sir.
I'll bet your house.
So, maybe their message was to be taken literally. That every single other person in this entire house is worthy of being shot because everyone except this baby is capable of holding a gun. Eventually, cathartic fantasies become reality. Virtual bullets turn to steel, and children raised by modern warfare may one day find it difficult to discern digital corpses from real ones. A series that isn't afraid to explore consequence and the idea that the good guys might not be that good is Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption 2's honor system isn't fleshed out. Its scale of high to low honor is pretty weighted. You have to be a real bad boy to get yourself truly into that low honor end of the scale. I spent most of my playthrough as a kind of moral centrist, able to push myself into that high honor end of the scale with just the main story and a few good Samaritan side missions. There are several quality of life changes that are severely missing from all the systems in Red Dead 2, but there is clearly some attempt at a general moral code that makes this playground of violence slightly more friendly. The game is obviously set in the rootin' tootin' Wild West. The historical context of the locale does give you a justification as to why such violent acts would occur. You play as a cowboy, robbing trains, running from the law. You're not exactly going to be a pacifist. But this violence has a heavy backdrop of consequence. Arthur Morgan and the gang he's found himself so homely in are on the run from the law following their previous sins. From the first chapter, the game presents the characters needing to dig themselves out of this hole they've found themselves in because of their violent tendencies. The West is coming to an end, and if they don't adapt, their time will come to an end too. Arthur's able to act as he pleases, but those acts will always carry with them a great deal of karma. If you shoot someone in the middle of a town, not only will your honour go down, but you'll become a wanted man, and even have a bounty placed over your head that will alert police to your presence. If you want to be a bad man, you're going to have to be a bad man. It gives the feeling that this senseless violence isn't so senseless. There is always a code that can either be adhered to or disregarded, but the presence of said code is inherently the presence of meaning. Each character adheres to their own strict set of morals, so you have to decide where you want Arthur to fit into the world. You may be allowed to commit heinous acts of violence, but what you will not be allowed to do is to ignore it. Arthur Morgan is constantly reminding people that he is a bad person, that he has sinned. This man, full of remorse and regret, admits that he is afraid of what he has done. Time and time again, he is reminded by people around him that he is at least trying to do good. There is a moral compass to be found in Red Dead Redemption 2. I would go as far as to say that Red Dead Redemption 2 is a closer experience to Undertale than it is to The Last of Us. Let me just humour you for a second. Both explore morality in ways in which how you interact with other people can guarantee you a different ending. Both have a deep connection with violence and are almost compelled by said violence to continue to test players' emotions and how they interact with the world. Red Dead and The Last of Us may both be about cycles of violence, but only one gives the player any chance to make a change to said cycle on their own. And let's not forget, Undertale is also about a cycle of violence, just one between monsters and humans. And one of Undertale's central ideas is that it is in our own power to change this cycle and free the monsters in one way or another. Undertale may not be a AAA third-person American shooter, but it is a game with consequences, and choices that carry consequences along with them, just like Red Dead Redemption 2 is. Rockstar is one of the most scrutinised developers when it comes to depicting and justifying violence, and I want to defend them, because they really do try. One of the most talked about when considering the topic of video game violence. Most of the argument my mother had for me not playing the series as a young age was her understanding of the game through controversy and reporting on the game. I remember dinner table arguments where I exclaimed that it was what all of my friends were playing, and my mum was easily able to shut down these protests with the argument that, in Grand Theft Auto, you can shoot and kill prostitutes. Many years later, when I finally got my hands on Grand Theft Auto 5, I began to actually be able to consider for myself, why would you want to shoot and kill innocent people? This seems like the obvious, yet rhetorical question that has stumped parents and critics for many years since the game's release. But I'd like to argue that the question Rockstar may be posing is, why would you want to kill and shoot innocent people? The standard game design that Rockstar showcases in many of their titles is a very hands-off open-world experience. The hands that are off the controller are theirs, leaving your hands to move and act as freely as you would like. What this means is that, yes, if you wish, you can shoot as many people as you'd like. You can stand in one spot and mow down as many pedestrians as you see. But Rockstar did not place that rifle into your hands and tell you to stand there and do that. Your depiction of violence is out of their hands. The playground has opened up without adult supervision. What you will be met with is consequences in at least some way, either for the sake of realism or just to ground you that little bit more. Cause enough violence or destruction and you will receive a wanted level, and the police will hone in on your location. It breaks up that cycle just enough. You cannot just stand in one spot letting your hands break away from you to inflict as much terror as possible. There must be some damage control. Many online have described this as not a desire to inflict violence, but rather to cause mayhem. When you get a wanted level and begin to be tailed by law enforcement, another game within itself is to evade them and cause the most mayhem as possible. Wreak enough havoc and you will eventually be stopped, sent back to a loading screen. but it's unlikely it'll be the last time you try anything like that again. As for the story, well, that's a different discussion entirely. Yes, there is deplorable, unavoidable violence in Grand Theft Auto's story, but the story contains its own set of motivations, consequences, and most importantly, symbolism. It is not a big secret that GTA is symbolic of modern American culture. Chasing the American dream, guns, money, cars, all that kind of stuff. It's all glorified to the point of satire in GTA. When you play as Michael, Trevor, or Franklin, they don't come across particularly badass. Each one of them has their own deep set of problems going on. They are not inspirational chosen ones, screaming, "Hey kids, please try this at home." They're losers. It's symbolic of America. It's why we've never seen a mainline GTA game set in London or Tokyo. There is a deep connection to the American experience. And a lot of games do address violence this way, symbolism. Think of the monsters in Silent Hill 2 for example, representing the guilt and frustration pent up inside James Sunderland. Or The Binding of Isaac, Isaac fighting his inner demons and these symbols of his mother. Meaning is the only thing that separates us from monsters. So let's go over what I've spoken about so far. Purpose, meaning, and contextual value all seem to be pretty important in understanding why we need violence in games. And when a game isn't able to justify these ideas, it can lead to a really dissonant connection between the actions of the player and what we act out on screen. There must be a certain amount of consequence and knock-on effects to many of the more realistic entries. It's true that many of these games have a large focus on the process of killing, how it's carried out, why it should matter, and that makes that dissonant feeling heavily die down. Player choice matters. When it feels like it doesn't matter, or that you can't fully connect with what's going on, the bullet holes start to show. That brings me to two different games that I feel execute video game violence perfectly. They may resemble each other, but their motivations are wildly different. You already knew I was going to talk about it. Hotline Miami is being considered a cult classic just over a decade after it was released, and rightly so. The airtight gameplay and neon style are easily lovable. The story is left intentionally hard to piece together. It may take multiple playthroughs or explanations in order to completely come to terms with exactly what's going on. You are honed in on combat. You are tasked with taking out high-profile targets and criminal organizations, often all residing within one building that you have to sweep through like a mortal cleaner. Each enemy explodes in blood as they fall, before another one rushes through, not letting you stop to think or breathe over the last one's lifeless body. The fast-paced, precise gameplay cannot be understated, as there is a complete lack of focus on anything else that's going on other than the opposition standing right in front of your bat or rifle. You may never learn the names of any of your targets or why you've been sent to eliminate them. You may just find yourself lost in this gameplay loop of utter carnage. Ape Out released in 2019 to a plethora of raving reviews. It's a similarly top-down, high-octane beat-em-up, but there is a style and artistic direction to be found in Ape Out that gives it a very different feel. The entire score is delivered through thousands of drum samples that are able to adapt to whatever's happening on screen. You play as a gorilla attempting to escape captivity, and the depiction of this violence feels very motivated. Your choices are to either try and escape and be shot at, or to remain behind a glass pane for the rest of your life. It's in this gameplay loop that there is a real sense of anger, of primal instincts that are dying to be released. The combat requires every corner of your eye to be constantly combed over and monitored. The walls of your surroundings hide enemies and dead ends that need to be reacted to in time to keep stampeding to your freedom. The main difference in how these games present their combat is in reaction versus strategy. Hotline Miami requires you to get overly familiar with each level in order to figure out what the best course of action might be. Take out an enemy here, grab his gun, that'll cover you for the next 3 rooms, until you need to figure out what your next course of action is. Ape Out potentially could be read in the same way, but it's best played effectively rather than retrospectively. The enemies are there to test how you think on the spot, and your progress is tied to your familiarity with how you react to whatever is thrown at you. The time it takes to respawn in each entry can reflect these design choices. Hotline Miami shoots you in the face with a quick "you're dead" in the corner of your screen. It implores you to instantly retry to face the same challenge as before. Ape Out explodes into an echo of your death, slowly zooming out to show you the exact route you took and every decision you made on the spot to get to that point. Why are these titles so explicit in depicting their violence so differently? In many ways, each one contradicts the other. There's no confetti when you eliminate someone in Hotline Miami, only a tally on your point counter that hardly interrupts your session. In Ape Out, the highest expression comes from this outbreak of strength onto a guard or soldier. Their body feels like echolocation. The crash from their figure going limp against a wall is reverberated through the game's score for several seconds afterwards, literally ramping up the score to enhance the thrill you feel. You are completely driven towards violence and its purging reward. Once a level is cleared in Hotline Miami, you are left to meander in silence back through the slasher film you've just reenacted in the establishment you've just waltzed into. There's deliberate time to brood and contemplate, but this time is ironically so easy to ignore. You mean nothing, you're given nothing, you feel nothing except the wish to continue on. In Ape Out, this culmination of carnage just continues to compile. There's a brief pause between sections, but only enough to breathe a sigh of relief before blasting through the next pane of glass. Without dying, everything is done within one take. It's like the reverberating walls have woken up every enemy in the building and they're on their way to you, and you're ready to take them on. Once you complete a whole chapter, you are greeted by a soothing silence. You really did it. If the violence depicted is the elephant in your living room, Hotline Miami is dragging the couch around the elephant and throwing you down in front of the television, drowning out the trumpets with flashy visuals and awesome music. It is not enough to just knock an enemy out. You must stamp their head into the floor or bash their skulls against the checkered tiles below. You are not just being scored on how efficient you are, but how creative you are as well. To achieve a higher score, it's necessary to switch weapons multiple times in order to prove how flexible of a killer you are. Hotline Miami wants you to be completely desensitized. It wants to show you that even if the elephant was blocking your view of the screen, you wouldn't even care. You'd still find a way to play around it. In Ape Out, you are not just the gorilla but the elephant too, crying out that no, my violence will not be ignored, it is motivated and necessary. Violence versus man, not the other way around, an expression of emotion so deep and integral that it is cathartic. A primal drive to escape the chains. You are an embodiment of violence that us humans are holding captive, making it clear that this will not be tolerated and will be ignored, stripped down to an animal in a cage, incapable of exploring anything within ourselves or what we consume. With each crash and slam, you feel the elephant grow larger, this unignorable primal drive forward, to survive, to let this violence continue. The elephant cannot be studied behind glass. It needs to be experienced to be understood. The only way we can address violence is by making it unable to be ignored. Ape Out cannot be shrugged off. Both games want to bring the elephant out of the shadows. One does it by proving that we are ignorant towards it, and one shows us just how big of a fuss that elephant can make. We may always need violence in games. It's a fantastic structural foundation in gameplay and narrative, and has been since the inception of video games. However, we cannot leave the elephants in our space in the dark. Motivation, symbolism, and consequence can all serve as our watering hole, something that we can hold on to save us from ourselves. But I think us gamers know what we're doing. We're able to address the violence we depict properly. It's the only thing that stops us all from a stampede.